And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, March 23rd, 2025. And starting with the state of the sea ice this Sunday afternoon, ice is extensive throughout the northern central Bering with the pack ice edge just past St. Matthew Island, and we've had a brisk and much colder northerly flow of air here through the weekend. It'll continue into early this coming week, so the ice could actually advance a little bit southward. And these cold temperatures will likely hold for a while before moderating slightly. Overall, though, temperatures are expected to average below normal across much of Alaska heading into the first week of April. So we're not looking at an appreciable amount of any melting ice, with maybe the exception of the far southern edge. And we're almost near that point in the season where we've reached maximum ice extent. That typically happens in the end of March or early April. So once I get official word on that, I'll pass it along. Otherwise, we have a low pressure coming in across the northern panhandle late tonight, Monday morning. It's coming in off the northeastern Gulf Coast. It'll bring some accumulating snow, especially up there around above Skagway at White Pass along the Klondike Highway. There is a winter weather advisory for late tonight through Monday morning for 3 to 5 inches of snow. We have another low southeast of Kodiak Island that's going to keep some showers, snow and rain showers going along areas of the Gulf Coast. And then this front, this nearly stationary front across the western mainland, will gradually weaken Monday into Tuesday, but it still has some areas of mainly light snow along that will continue tonight into Monday morning. And then way out to the west, there's a ridge of high pressure from eastern Russia down across the central Bering to south of the central Aleutians in the North Pacific. And then a low with an occluded front, a gale force front, that'll be pushing across the western half of the Aleutians during the day on Monday. And then by the time we get into Monday, we find that low still southeast there of Kodiak Island, and a couple of spokes of energy rotating around it with some enhancing moisture that'll come up from the south and affect the panhandle at times. This trough or former front weakening as it works its way eastward, and then that front out there across the western Aleutians will have some gale force winds on Monday. By the time that front advances eastward on Tuesday, it'll begin to weaken, and we will have another little impulse of low pressure working its way along the northeastern Gulf Coast that could keep some rain and snow showers or areas of rain and snow going along portions of the Panhandle and Gulf Coast. So here is the marine weather outlook on Monday for the inner channels of the Panhandle. South-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. There could be gusts to 35 knots. Lynn Canal with waves of 4 feet. Stevens Passage 4-foot waves and waves running 4 to 5 feet. Dixon Entrance. Areas south of Sitka along the outer nearshore waters of the outer coast. South winds to 25 knots, waves 11-12 feet. Those winds become southeasterly off of Sitka and outside of the icy strait corridor, and then turn easterly up there at Cape Suckling with winds generally around 20 knots and waves 8 to 10 feet. For Tuesday, we'll find north winds for the inner channels, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage at 15 knots with waves of 3 feet. Southeast winds of 15 knots and waves running 3 feet there, especially Dixon Entrance outside of Metlakatla. For the far southern areas, we have that low that's way down to the south, but increasing gradient could cause some gusts to 35 knots off of Prince of Wales Island. Those winds turn easterly at Sitka and outside the icy strait at 25 knots with 9-foot waves, and then easterly winds to 20 knots out of Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling on Tuesday with waves of 8 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, starting with Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots on Monday, waves 2 feet. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, easterly winds at 15 knots and waves right around 5-6 feet. As we go down the length of Cook Inlet, northeast to north winds 15 to 20 knots with waves 4 to 5 feet, especially there off of Anchor Point toward Kamishak Bay. And then on Tuesday, northeast winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet there. 20-knot easterly winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to Kayak Island and waves right around 6 feet. Going down the length of Cook Inlet, north winds 15 knots, upper Cook Inlet, Turnagain Arm, Knit Arm, And then as we drop down south off of Anchor Point, north winds to 25 knots, waves 6 feet, and 20-knot northeast winds as we get outside of Kennedy entrance into the northeast side of Kodiak Island with 6 to 7 foot waves. Strongest winds around Kodiak Island on Monday will be northerly 25-knot winds, Shelikof Strait, 5-foot waves. As we trail out down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be northwesterly, 30 knots on the North Pacific side with waves of 3 to 6 feet. On the Bering side, look for north winds of 20 to as high as 30 knots, especially north of Cold Bay with waves running as high as 9 to 10 feet. Winds will come down across the region, generally north-northwest winds on Tuesday, 15 to 20 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knots along the North Pacific side, and then 15 to 20 knots along the Bering side. Waves highest there just north of Cold Bay at about 8 feet. So I mentioned that gale force front moving through the western Aleutians on Monday. We're looking at southerly gales, 35 to 40 knots from Adak through Kiska and Shemya. Waves locally over 15 feet there, Kiska to Shemya. For the eastern Aleutians, winds generally north-northwest, 30 knots, the highest there around Unalaska, but becoming variable at 20 knots between Atka and Adak. On Tuesday, that front will weaken, not be as prominent, those gale force winds coming down, but we're looking at northwest winds, 20 knots over the far eastern Aleutians. Switching back southwesterly at 20 knots, just kind of a reflection of that front. What's left of it, more of a trough. And then behind that trough, winds are west at 25 to 20 knots from Atka through Adak to Kiska. And then along the southwest coast, we have 30-knot northwest winds here in the wider expanse of both Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay. Where there is open water, there could be heavy freezing spray in this area of the southeast Bering. Keep that in mind. North winds to 20 knots, St. Matthew to the Pribilov Islands. And then along the lower Yukon coast, Etolan straight up to the wider expanse of Norton Sound, look for northwest winds right around 20 knots on Monday. For Tuesday, still 25-knot northwest winds here within Kuskokwim Bay, 15-knot northwest winds within Bristol Bay. Variable winds around 10 knots there in the Pribilovs, but an easterly wind to 30 knots at St. Matthew. And then along the lower Yukon Delta on up into Norton Sound, look for north winds at 15 knots. So again, this ice could still drift a bit southward here early in the week as a result of just the colder air in place and that general northerly flow. And then through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, Monday, northwest winds of 20 knots. As we come up through the Chukchi, west winds, 15 knots, Kivalina through Point Hope to just south of Point Lay. Then those winds reverse. You get up around Wainwright, all along the Beaufort Sea coast, look for generally east winds 20 to 25 knots. And on Tuesday, easterly winds continue along the Beaufort Sea coast down to Wainwright, but not quite as strong. Easterly winds at 15 knots. And then as we come down through the lower Chukchi Sea, look for north-northwest winds right around 10 knots before they turn more northerly through the Bering Strait along the west side of St. Lawrence Island and, the west side of the Seward Peninsula, north side of St. Lawrence Island. For Tuesday, we are looking at northerly winds right around 15 knots.